That night, Alice was home alone. Her husband, John, was on a business trip and wouldn't return until the next day. The house, an old Victorian building, was shrouded in darkness, with only the faint glow of stars to illuminate the rooms. Alice had planned to take advantage of the evening to relax and read a book, but the feeling of loneliness soon set in. She was used to having John around, and the quietness of the house bothered her. Every creak of the floorboards and whisper of the wind outside seemed to whisper dark secrets. As she headed to the kitchen to prepare some tea, Alice felt a shiver run down her spine. It seemed like something was watching her from the shadows, hidden in the dark corners of the house. She tried to dismiss the feeling as paranoia, but the uneasiness persisted. While in the kitchen, Alice heard a sound coming from upstairs. There were soft, shuffling steps. Her heart raced, and she felt paralyzed for a moment. The house was empty, or so she thought. Cautiously, she climbed the stairs, fearing what she might find. As she reached the top of the stairs, the feeling that she was not alone increased. The shadowy corridors seemed to narrow around her, and the shadows of the old furniture took on sinister shapes. She tried to convince herself that she was just imagining things, but fear continued to tighten her chest. Alice entered the room and turned on the light. The room was empty, but the feeling that something was wrong didn't leave her. She lay down on the bed, picked up a book, and tried to distract herself by reading. However, the feeling that something was watching her persisted. Time passed, and Alice's restlessness only grew. She closed the book and tried to calm down, but then she heard a whisper coming from the corner of the room. It was a faint, indistinct voice, as if someone was whispering incomprehensible words. She quickly turned towards the sound, but saw no one. The room was empty except for herself. However, the whispers continued, increasingly audible and disturbing. Alice could no longer ignore the feeling that something was terribly wrong in her home. She decided to go downstairs and call John, telling him about the strange events she was witnessing. But when she picked up the phone, she realized there was no dial tone. Frustrated, Alice tried to open the front door to leave the house and seek help from the neighborhood. However, the handle was stuck, and the door would not move. She was locked inside her own house without any explanation. A feeling of panic took over Alice. She ran to the windows, but they were all locked, and the curtains refused to open. She was trapped, isolated from the outside world, while whispers and ominous shadows filled her home. Alice was in a panic. She ran around the house, trying to open doors and windows, but everything remained locked and motionless. The whispers, now more audible, seemed to move with her, echoing through the corridors like an ominous song. In her desperation, Alice picked up the landline phone again and tried to dial John's number, but the device remained silent, with no signal or dialing. She began to feel like she was in a nightmare, trapped in her own home, at the mercy of unseen forces. She decided her only option was to investigate why the house was locked and isolated from the outside world. With a knot in her stomach, she climbed the stairs again, determined to explore every nook and cranny of that ancient building. The dark corridors enveloped her, and each step seemed to echo like thunder. The whispers continued, and she could swear that every now and then she saw shadows moving quickly in the corners of her eyes. Even so, she couldn't make out what was causing those shadows. She entered rooms and opened doors she hadn't seen in years. Every room was exactly as she remembered, but the feeling that something was wrong only grew. She knew she needed to find answers and a way out. Finally, upon entering one of the rooms, Alice noticed something out of place. One of the windows, which she was sure was locked, was ajar. Moonlight spilled into the room, illuminating a small table near the window. With caution, Alice approached and saw something that gave her goosebumps. There was a letter on the table, with her name handwritten on the front. Trembling, she took the letter and began to read. "Dear Alice, you are not alone in this house. There is something here that cannot be seen, but that is always present. It is a specter from the past, a secret that the house hides. It wants something from you, something that you must discover for yourself. Follow the shadows, listen to the whispers, and seek what was lost. Only when you unravel the mystery will you find the freedom you so desire. Don't be afraid, Alice. You are the key to all of this. Sincerely, a friend." Alice's hands shook as she read the letter. Who could have written those disturbing words? What did you mean by a specter of the past? She looked at the half-open window and noticed that the moonlight formed a path of shadows on the floor, pointing toward the hallway. Resolute, Alice decided to follow the path of the shadows. She went downstairs again, now with renewed determination. The whispers accompanied her, but she tried not to pay attention to them. There was something to be uncovered, and she was determined to discover the truth. As she followed the path of shadows, Alice noticed that it led her back to the room where she had found the letter. The shadows seemed to gather there, and she approached the window. As she looked outside, she saw something that took her breath away. In the garden, in the moonlight, a shadowy figure stood. It was a woman dressed in Victorian attire with long, dark hair and a pale face. Her eyes were fixed on Alice, and she could swear the woman was whispering something, although she couldn't hear the words. The figure reached out towards Alice, and she felt an inexplicable calling, a connection between the past and the present. She knew she needed to leave the house and follow that shadowy figure, even if it took her to unknown and dangerous places. With determination, Alice turned and ran back into the room, determined to find a way to open the window and follow the shadowy figure. She was willing to unravel the mystery and find the freedom promised to her in the letter. Alice was determined to follow the shadowy figure she had seen in the garden by moonlight. She knew that that presence was linked to the strange events in her house, and that perhaps it was the key to solving the mystery that kept her locked inside. Carefully, Alice searched the room for something she could use to open the window. She found an old curtain hook in a corner, and with some difficulty, managed to fit it into the window latch. With a concentrated effort, she managed to unlock the window and open it. The night air invaded the room, bringing with it the fresh smell of grass and flowers in the garden. Alice hesitated for a moment, thinking about the consequences of following the shadowy figure, but curiosity and the desire for freedom drove her. She climbed onto the windowsill and carefully began to climb down the outside of the house. The cold garden soil touched her feet, and she found herself facing the shadowy figure. The Victorian woman was closer now, her deep, fathomless eyes fixed on Alice. The figure extended its hand again, as if inviting her to follow it. Alice felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if she had known this woman at some point in her life, even though she knew that was impossible. Taking a deep breath, Alice took the first step towards the shadowy figure. As she approached, the woman backed away, maintaining a constant distance. It was as if she was guiding Alice to some unknown destination. The garden was shrouded in darkness, and the shadows seemed to take on a life of their own, dancing around them. Alice had the feeling that time was not following a normal course in that place. Each step seemed to take her deeper into a mysterious and timeless world. Eventually, the shadowy figure led Alice to a door she had never noticed before. It was an ancient door with intricate carvings and a weathered iron handle. The Victorian woman pointed to the door, as if she were indicating that this was where Alice would find the answers she was looking for. With a moment's hesitation, Alice turned the handle and pushed the door open. What she saw on the other side left her speechless. It was as if she had entered a completely different world, a place that did not follow the laws of reality. In front of him was a room lit by an ethereal golden light. Walls covered in antique tapestries depicted scenes that seemed straight out of a fairy tale. In the center of the room was a table covered in strange and antique objects. But what caught Alice's attention most was the presence of other shadowy figures, all dressed in Victorian attire similar to the woman who had led her there. They were standing silently, looking at her with lifeless eyes. Alice felt a shiver run down her spine and realized that she had entered a place where the past and present intertwined in an inexplicable way. She knew there was much more to discover, and that she needed to find answers to the mysteries that surrounded her. The shadowy figures began to move, approaching Alice slowly and solemnly. They were not threatening, but their intentions remained an enigma. She felt that she had played an important role in following the Victorian woman here, and that she was now involved in something much bigger than she could have imagined. Alice remained in the mysterious room, surrounded by shadowy figures dressed in Victorian attire. They watched with empty eyes, without uttering a single word. The silence was oppressive, but Alice felt like she was closer to unlocking the secret that had brought her here. The Victorian woman who had guided Alice to that place stepped forward. Her deep eyes met Alice's, conveying a silent message. She extended her hand again, but this time not to invite her to follow her, but rather to deliver something. Alice noticed that the woman was offering her an antique box, adorned with intricate carvings and covered in the dust of time. Carefully, she picked up the box and looked at it. As the shadowy figures continued to watch her, Alice opened the box. What she found inside took her breath away, a series of letters yellowed with age, each addressed to her but written in a handwriting she didn't recognize. As she read the letters, a story began to unfold before her eyes. They were letters written by a woman named Elizabeth, who had lived in that house decades ago. In the letters, Elizabeth confessed her deepest fears and secrets, describing encounters with shadows and whispers that tormented her. Alice realized that Elizabeth's experiences were surprisingly similar to what she herself had experienced over the past few nights. The Victorian woman, who Alice now recognized as Elizabeth, was trying to tell her story and seek help through letters. As she leafed through the letters, Alice felt a deep connection with Elizabeth. She knew she needed to help this lost soul find the peace she so desperately sought. It was as if the past and present were intertwined, and Alice was the key to unlocking the mystery. Looking at the shadowy figures around her, Alice spoke with determination. She committed herself to discovering the truth behind the shadows and freeing Elizabeth and the other souls trapped there. The shadowy figures seemed to approve of her decision, and a feeling of acceptance filled the room. It was as if the souls trapped there were waiting for someone brave enough to face the unknown and unravel the mystery that imprisoned them. With the commitment firmly in place, Alice began to explore the house deeper. As she investigated the rooms, she found clues and objects that led her to surprising discoveries. She found Elizabeth's old diaries, which detailed the dark rituals performed in the house decades ago. Alice also discovered secret passages and hidden rooms, each with its own horror story. She was determined to uncover the house's dark past and help the souls trapped there. As the weeks passed, Alice made remarkable progress. She managed to dispel some of the shadows that haunted the house, freeing the trapped souls. Elizabeth, the Victorian woman, finally found peace and disappeared, leaving behind only gratitude in her empty eyes. With each mystery solved and each soul freed, the house began to lose its sinister atmosphere. The whispers became less frequent, and the shadows lost their intensity. The feeling of imprisonment that once haunted Alice was replaced by a sense of triumph and redemption. When John finally returned from his business trip, he found a transformed Alice in a house that no longer hid dark secrets. She shared the story of what had happened during his absence, and together they decided to preserve the memory of the lost souls they had found. The house, once haunted by the darkness of the past, has been restored and turned into a museum, where the stories of the souls who live there are told and remembered. Alice and John lived their lives with the knowledge that they had faced the unknown and helped lost souls find eternal peace. The mystery that had kept Alice locked in her house that lonely night had been solved, and the darkness that had haunted her had turned to light.